with composers, I always just like to start with where your musical beginning was and then how you realized that the film scoring world was what you wanted to put your focus into.
Yeah, what I would say about it is that I mean, I grew up in a musical family, so my dad was a conductor, so I really like there was music from the get-go. And I started playing piano like when I was super young, and there were just musicians around the house all the time. I switched from piano to guitar at like 5 years old, um, and got much more serious with guitar, although I kind of kept piano going. And as time went on, there were my dad collected some instruments, and more than that, I would kind of hang around his heels in orchestra rehearsals or whatever, or get to go play with some instrument or another. So that's really where it started out. It um, When I was in high school, I grew up in Stony Brook on Long Island in New York, and our high school had a fantastic music program. There were like several orchestras, several jazz ensembles, like within one high school,
Wow.
big high school with like good funding for the arts. And the top jazz ensemble was like playing nationally, like competing in competitions, and there's some big names that have come through without like name dropping here. My one of my best friends was a fantastic jazz guitar player. I was not such like a bebop guitar player. Hadn't really like developed those chops. But the leader of the band, and this is around before 11th grade, had said, "Look, I know you play piano and we don't have somebody in the piano spot. If you study with this guy over the summer, then I'll set you up." And the guy he set me up with is a composer named Danny Deutsch. He's a fantastic musician and a great educator. And we studied that summer, and that was when things really turned for me. So he became kind of my mentor. He knows as much about Elliott Carter and heavy classical stuff. He had come through the Columbia Princeton labs for electronic music, experimental stuff. But he knows also as much about Afropop and soul and about just world music in general. So turned me on to all kinds of other stuff, and then also got me composing for real. So we were working on orchestral music. So I had not been doing things like that. I'd honestly been like playing in a band and doing some stuff in school, jazz and singing and whatever. But yeah, so he really kind of turned things around for me. Then I went to music school and a couple different ones, and then yeah, that's it's on the tail end of that, to the heart of your question, how I got into the film side. While in music school, I did connect with some directors, like student directors, and did some work like that. And also kind of like other media or other visual work, some more experimental stuff and some weird theater stuff, and working with some dance things back then. And then I got out of school and I had two very close friends. We had decided to move cross country together. They had also been to music schools, and we formed this kind of little chamber group together. That was my first career, and that group ended up getting signed and touring for here overseas and in the States. And the main thing is that that group, which was called Tin Hat Trio, was licensed. Its music was licensed into film all the time.
Mm.
So rather than, that's sort of my background, but like it's rather than like going to like USC, like fantastic film scoring program, and then getting a gig like pouring coffee or doing some Sibelius work or something for a established composer, working my way through their studio. I really came in sideways. I was getting my music licensed a lot. I had also the chapter I left out is I had been an engineer. I ran the knitting factory in New York, and as an engineer, I toured with a lot of those artists, John Zorn, Bill Frisell, the Lounge Lizards, a bunch of those groups. And so I'd also cut my teeth technically. I had the orchestral background, and I was a performer. I was getting my music license, and you can probably see like it just was sort of an organic thing where they'd ask me if I could edit, they want to use this track for the film, like they wished it was this or that, edited this way or that way, or slightly different instrumentation. And I would raise my hand and say, that's something I can do. I can handle the engineering, the editing, I can handle orchestration and classical chops. I can do performative stuff because it's my performed music. I can flesh it out, add strings to it, I can make it bigger. And then eventually I can also score your film. Um, and so that's sort of how it happened. And it coincided with me, um, end of a long answer here, but it coincided with the fact, to be honest, that I'd been touring as an engineer
Mhm.
really extensively for several years. And then I got my own band signed and toured like crazy. You know, we were playing music that was kind of chamber music in between like jazz, some avant-garde jazz, and then also sort of like chamber classical music,
Mm,
fine art centery stuff, but very popular. Like we did very well in Europe. So I just spent like all this time on the road.
mm.
And first as an engineer, then as a musician, I really kind of burned out on it. I wanted some more normalcy in my life. And I thought at the time that being a film composer might bring some more normalcy, which it did in some ways. I at least stay home. Even if I'm in my studio for 18 hours a day, I'm at least
Oh,
home. So,
I mean, that's something, yeah.
yeah.
And with On Swift Horses, what was maybe something from when you first heard about the project that you thought would be an exciting challenge or something new that you would get to do with the film?
Yeah, I think well, yeah, the I'll give you the long answer and then please edit it down if you have to. The long answer is that, because I came into film the way I did by
Mm,
honestly by like licensing opportunities first and then kind of expanding on that. A lot of my early work was really based around the sound of my ensemble.
mm,
And so that was great because it was a way into this industry, it's a way into working with film, which I love doing. But it also could be limiting at times. Like I always wanted to be like, wait, I could do that too. Like I actually, I don't just do the guitar, violin, accordion, weird, chambery score. I can do this other stuff too. And it's harder to break into it the way I did anyway. And so especially in the beginning, I had less opportunities. So when it comes to On Swift Horses, this is in some ways, this kind of like old school romantic drama is in some ways what I imagined doing. I love like schmaltzy music. I love going for that, the kind of romance and the kind of like relationship drama stuff that's happening in this film. The tension, the butterflies in the stomach, all of the stuff with the love affairs that are happening, which also, because it's in the 1950s, carry an element of danger and risk. They're same-sex relationships and in a couple cases, and it's just so that I mean, it's a great kind of scoring challenge and not one that I got early on a lot. So that side of things, that's sort of like harkening back to some of that like classic Hollywood romantic drama stuff. Totally fun, totally and a bit different, while I've touched on it in other films. And then I'd say the only other sort of side of that is that there's a lot of like some pretty intense physical stuff, sex scenes in
mhm,
this, and I haven't had a lot of that either. So that was really interesting to get to explore. And the director Daniel, who's also done Fellow Travelers and Game of Thrones, so he knows his way around some get-togethers, let's say. And he was great, and he gave me some great directives with it.
mhm.
Just remembering to kind of like to keep that feeling when you're just all this sort of like the rush of emotion and feelings when you're meeting someone and what even a glance can do and those kinds of things. So I think he helped with that too.
Yeah. I got to interview Luke, the cinematographer, back when it premiered at TIFF. So I talked to him a while ago, but one of the things that he mentioned wanting to do with the images, and I'm curious if it came into the score too, was blending this sort of classic Americana feeling and look with queer stories that are not normally put in this Americana light. And if there was something specific or anything that you did to kind of make it feel like bring in this kind of untold part of American history with the imagery of what we think of when we think of America in the 1950s.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was a funny thing. It was sort of a balancing act that way
Mm,
because the director Daniel Minahan made it clear from the beginning that he didn't want to feel like a period film. This is not Ken Burns. We didn't have to be so legit 1950s. It was really about the characters, the kind of overall narrative arc, and most importantly to him was this idea that at all times, while we might be scoring a scene in the 1950s and it's young love. that the understanding that there's real danger and risk,
Mhm.
and that that has to be reflected in the music. Like as much as you can just sort of get lost in the moment, there has to be an undercurrent in there in the music that describes the fact that, like, at any moment this might come apart, and not just that love is lost, but that life,
Mhm.
as it is lost. It carries true risk. Um, and so that I think that was more the approach. I think that he did favor, and I favor myself, like a more organic approach instrumentation wise. So, and I think that makes it easier in terms of at least not like betraying a time period. It's not like I've got some like lush 90s synth things happening all of a sudden in a sex scene or whatever. That's so we're keeping it kind of on the organic side. Um and then yeah, it was just that thing of like on some of the guitar cues. There's a passage of the film where Jacob's character Julius, he's really falling for a man named Henry,
Mhm.
and I mean, besides just taking the risk of having, a gay relationship at that time period, they're also doing some crazy gambling schemes. I'm not giving too much away here. And just he really wanted it to be just this incredible amount of excitement and sort of like wildness, like come almost coming apart, like risk taking. All of those are the kinds of like subjective terms he would throw in
Mhm.
to alter the music. So if I did something that was straighter, like here's some 1950s guitar or whatever, that he was like, he just said like it really doesn't matter. We don't need to stick to that. I would rather it capture the emotion and not think so much about, specific the tone of, 1954 Gibson guitars or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And you pointed it out that there are like two types of danger. There's the danger of just losing a romantic relationship, but then also the danger of being found out and, the violent ramifications that come from that, from
yeah.
their relationships. Do you feel like you scored those two senses of danger in different ways? Because they are slightly different. It's the same emotion, but it
Yeah.
manifests in a different way.
Yeah, I hope so. That's definitely was my goal, I should say, was to score, score both aspects. And I think I did it by it's in some ways it's like there's maybe a palette for love and a palette you know, for the risk that love carries with it, for heartbreak, and there's the heartbreak palette and the loss palette. But again, I think what I'm doing is there's an undercurrent through it that is it has sort of like less control, and
Mm-hmm.
it's less I'm using like a lot of extended technique stuff on instrumentation, on some of the instruments doing things that aren't kind of the standard sound, and so I think that is what is signifying the kind of inherent risks that's there, the danger that's there, at all times. I think that's the way that I went after it, rather than sort of like tucking in some stuff that I don't want to say it's like exactly discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
It's just something that's undercurrent or kind of tucked in to the texture that is maybe just like there's a little bit of uneasiness, even as there's like burgeoning love stuff happening at the same time. So
Yeah. My last question for you. I read that you collect antique and unusual instruments. Did any of
mhm.
those make its way into On Swift Horses?
Yeah, but not so much as featured. Well, I should take that back. There's one instrument I have that's like a piano with it's an old player piano that has incredibly soft felt, so super spongy sounding, rather than like an attacking crisp piano. And so that makes its way in, and a number of the main themes are played on that. And then let me think. I mean, I've got some weird old, like, sort of auto harp like things, some were sold like door to door, and some of those instruments make their way in, but they're going to be more sort of built into the textures
Mm.
rather than a feature. I don't have any auto harp solos or ukulele or marxophone or any of those things. I'm it's more, I use the tremoloa which is a kind of, it would look like an auto harp. It has a bar and slides around or whatever. But again, that was sort of more, it's more to tuck that stuff into the fabric of a cue rather than it being featured. I do play some old guitars, some lap guitars that are, from the 30s, 40s. I mean, old antique in terms of that.
Mhm.
And my main acoustic guitar is from the 1890s. So yes, okay, there are some antiques,
Wow.
but also lots of, there's also vibraphone, there's also electric guitar, Jazz Master from the 60s or whatever. There's also I don't know, waterphone, like some weird metal percussion stuff I have that's bowed vibe. I use vibraphone a bunch on it, including bowing it instead of striking it with a mallet. So yeah, that covers a lot of it anyway. And then an orchestra, although it's mostly just strings. Strings and a little bit of woodwinds, no brass on this one, and the percussion I did myself. So
Oh, wow.
yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you so much,